enormous pleasure to be sitting here with one of the greatest composers of film music of our day, John Powell.
You must remember that I don't hold film music terribly high in my opinion.
And
thank you.
We also brought Batu and Holly that are working with him on many of his projects as well, so give them a round of applause. And I have the privilege to lead this interview. We've got about an hour, and we're going to be talking about John's music and about the collaboration between them three, and also the music that we're going to be hearing tonight a bit. And then we'll take a few questions. Yes, I think we'll just get started.
Okay.
So, I was thinking a little bit about this chance that we're having to talk about your music. And there's so many incredible films that you've scored, and I think many of you will know them by list. In films that impacted us, sounds that impacted us, created change that was so effective. One of the things that I wanted to start out with was thinking about how you developed your sound and where that came from.
My belief of where any composers find perhaps we describe as a more unique sound, is in our playlists, the playlists of our lives. So the very first pieces of music you hear that suddenly change how you think about music, ones that touch you in a way that you weren't expecting, the ones that explain the universe in a way that language couldn't. That's how I was describing my first experiences of important music. In my case, it was the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. Yeah, and it's one of those pieces where I can still listen to it today, and it still explains things that, as a 7-year-old boy, I was struggling to understand. I mean, everything from love, religion, war, peace, everything. Or just the human condition. I think great music has stories in it that we can find our own version of. And it's like suddenly everything goes into 5D for me, as opposed to the 3D of normal language.
Right.
So these extra things that you don't have to, that there are no words for. That's the important thing about music, is we have it because there are no words for the things that music can say.
And so the music that influenced you from an early age, these great works from Mendelssohn, I'm assuming a lot of it was classical, but really important works. One phrase that I recently got from one of my former teachers, George Crumb, was telling me that great music is really needed by the world, and that there's a difference between good music and great music. So what is, for you, the designation between the two?
Everything is very personal, so it either works for you or it doesn't. It either touches you or it doesn't. And certain types of music don't. Certain types of music do. And I think the idea of writing it is still quite... I find it a little bit unbelievable that I can do it, and I'm not quite sure I'm doing it. I think it comes out well because of, I don't know, I get into a place that I'm not conscious. I think all the good things are written when I'm not really thinking, not thinking with my conscious brain. I think all the good stuff is unconscious, which suggests to me again that it's a big pot of everything that I've ever heard, and it comes to the surface, and then I think the thing I was taught as a composer as well was that composing is binary. Is it this note? Is it this note? You have to make a decision.
Right.
Is it this long or is it this long? Make a decision. And so if you get into the sort of weeds of everything that music is, you're constantly probably being pulled towards the things that you've enjoyed and that have spoken to you already.
Yeah.
So you're using the language of everybody else that's come before.
Composition class from John Powell, very important thing. It's a binary process. At the same time, a binary process that often has tens of thousands of different decisions that need to be made. So
yeah, you can't actually do it that slowly as I described it.
Moving on a little bit from these early influences of largely classical music, I'm assuming.
Well, yes, but then I was remembering Because the Night by Patti Smith, which is one of the great songs of all time by Bruce Springsteen. I remember listening to that and thinking, I don't understand. I understand Tchaikovsky, I understand Beethoven, I'm loving all of this, and then suddenly I hear this, and why is this stirring me? Why am I insides churning around? It seems to explain this yet another thing that I couldn't, that I perhaps hadn't thought the classical music would explain. And then, Thin Lizzy. I remember listening to Thin Lizzy and thinking, this is something else, and it does a great thing that I like, that I can't explain again.
So these are popular works that impressed you at a certain point, and not necessarily popular works that would turn all of these lovely people here into a John Powell. But they meant something to you.
Yes, as in all of those particular moments, and some of them might be strange to other people, or some people might understand them. They all add up to this other sort of like a palette of strange connections that I've made with all of these pieces. So when I write, I am thinking of Thin Lizzy at the same time as Stravinsky. I'm thinking of Mahalia Jackson at the same time as George Crumb. And those two things are not paradoxical to me. They make exact sense the same way. It doesn't leave one world and go to another. They're all in the same world. And the feeling I get from both of them explains everything in exactly the same way.
So perhaps we're at the root of what's unique about working as a film music composer. The ability to mix different styles and to create new musical universes and apply them in ways that aren't conventional, but could be conventional. And how do you make the decision how far to go in any particular direction? Is it natural for you?
Yes, it's natural, and I'm still shocked by sometimes how strange some of the music I've written is, as will be proved tonight, and how I'm still always concerned at how small my world is when I listen to other things. Every time I listen to somebody else that's really, really out there, I always think, what did I miss?
So, as we were waiting for you in the hotel lobby, I was talking a little bit to Batu about the studio that you work at, 5 Cat. And if any of you looked on the website of 5 Cat, there's a wonderful story with a lot of interesting things that might be written in between the lines about the origin of this studio. But the studio was another influence for you that, I'm assuming, really created a new search for sound for you. There was this time in the early 90s where you had moved from the UK to LA and started to work with Hans and with other people there, and were introduced, I'm assuming, at that point to how the studio works.
It was actually a college. I was lucky enough to go to a college that had an electronic music studio, and a great teacher called Glenn Morgan, who's American. I also had a composition teacher called Richard Arnell, who was a British symphonist and wonderful. So between the two of them, I had quite again, it was very eclectic. I discovered that the college had this electronic music studio. I mean, it sounds like I didn't know, but I was lucky to get in. I tried for 4 colleges and this was the only one that gave me a place, and we're still not quite sure why either. But I went and I discovered that nobody wanted to be in this electronics. You had to block out time for it, so you block out 2 hours. Or something like that. It was always very frustrating to me, and I discovered that nobody else would spend all night there, which I thought was why not? So I was every night I was in this electronics studio, and then after college, one of the first things I did was become a tape op at a big studio called Air Studios. This is before Air Lyndhurst, and I started and I cleaned patch cables and I made coffee and did anything I could, and that proved. And I learned about balance. I learned about sonic balance. Trying to balance all the elements, because yes, in film music now, what we're doing is kind of almost making a record. It's all elements, it's overdub elements a lot. It's not just you stand in front of an orchestra and they play, it happens. It's not really how it's done anymore. Unfortunately, sometimes you can, but a lot of these, what I believe is called hybrid scores are, sort of lots and lots of layers.
I think for a lot of newer composers and younger composers, it's hard for them to imagine the challenges of working in the studio 30 years ago, as opposed to relative ease in technology. So the ability to work on a laptop is a totally different experience than back then, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah, if you saw a picture of a laptop from when I was at college, you would laugh. And basically, this watch has got the same as a room full of stuff. Then it's thanks to what's called Moore's law. So it has changed, but I think the same. One of the things that's changed as well as access to music is now much easier. You used to have to really search for things, and now you can go on the internet and find anything from anywhere in the world, which makes it hard because there's so much shit out there. But that's to be understood. Everybody gives it a go, and that's fine. So trying to sort of wade through that and find things, that's why we rely on people who curate for us. Or you just have to be much more kind of, tenacious about it.
But the sound of the equipment did something. It actually, each piece of equipment had its own kind of personality. I'm remembering from when I was in conservatory, we used to get the catalogs from the music stores and look at the outboard gear and the microphones and all of the things that we wish we could afford. And it was almost like looking at a porno mag or something like that. You were looking at something you could never buy because it was too expensive or inaccessible somehow. But this passion for sound, this passion for equipment,
it's partly to do with the fact that I refer to myself as a disabled composer. I can't really work very well on paper. Ironically, I can write aleatorically on paper because that's kind of easy, and it's just making a graphic of a sort of an idea. But when you get into Western harmony, it's like I have to concentrate very hard on that. So I found that being able to do anything where I could immediately hear the results helped me intensely. I went for an audition, not an audition, but an entrance exam for the Royal College of Music. And they give you an exam, and on the exam was 4 bars of a Beethoven quartet. And it said, and then it had another 12 bars. It's empty, it's like, continue this. So I said to the adjudicator, I said, is there anywhere I could go that has a piano so I can work this out? And he said, if you need a piano, this is not the college for you. It was right, because they didn't have an electronic music studio, so fuck them. No, it's a brilliant college. It's a brilliant college. I would love to have gone, but I was clearly too dumb. So what I was saying is that technology has always helped me kind of get over that inability to sort of really be faster on paper and faster in my mind. I kind of have about a 2-second imagination. So I just sit with the sequencer and I play what I've done, and then it goes 2 seconds silence, and then I fill that in. I know what happens, and then I go back to the beginning again, and I play from the beginning, and I've got wait for the end, and then I very slowly from the front always like that. It's like I have a very, very, very old processor with very, very limited memory.
It's the sweeping technique.
It's you know, sometimes it just comes. So the two sort of techniques I use are either that, or I just basically play constantly, and it's terrible for hours and hours, and then I edit that. I then come back and listen to it, and I listen out of an hour of material, and maybe 5 seconds. And I listen for those 5 seconds, and Batu has seen the sessions where it's just endless takes of piano, and they're all not coloured except for like bar 357. There's like one little section that's suddenly red, and then 100 bars later there's another section that's like slightly less red, which means I'm not quite as confident. And then the colours go all the way down to yellow, which is, this is probably terrible, but you should just come back and check. So I use kind of that graphic. So I mean, I am of a generation of computers, you know, that's really why I can do this.
Organising your material and organising the process as you're doing it, so that you can make sure that you don't have to think about the things that you shouldn't be thinking about.
Yeah, I'm very, very slow at preparing to write, because I try and kind of get everything in place, and then when everything's, I think, there, I will be able to immediately go from one idea to another and just jump sounds, do all these kind of things. I mean, Batu is so patient with me as we spend 2, 3, 4 weeks just setting up sounds and setting up the palette. And then I always think he's wondering, you know, as the days go down before we have to deliver the score, it's like he always wonders, is he actually going to start writing ever? So, what's the worst one that I've ever done for that?
I think we normally spend as much time getting prepared as writing, but most times it's, I'd say, 2 months of prep and 6 weeks of writing.
Yeah, that's terrible, isn't it?
Actually, the prep doesn't start, so you're halfway into writing, and then all of a sudden, actually, here's another idea.
Yeah.
So the working relationship between you two is really crucial. He's actually helping you a lot. Can you describe to us how that comes across when you're working on a project?
I should describe that.
Maybe I should leave the room while you do that.
I'll be 90% honest. Well, there's a lot of prep work, like you said, and I think most Hollywood productions never have enough time. If John had 5 months from the start of the film until delivery, I don't think he'd ever need anybody to help him. But we just mainly have weeks, so we prep a lot together, and we have matching rigs in the studio so that multiple things could be cooking at the same time. But mainly, it's whatever is needed. It's sort of the overall rule, really.
It's changed over the years.
It's true.
It's changed over the years.
I mean, I've started with John as an intern, so obviously my responsibilities at the time was much different than they are now.
Yeah, it's important that you all know, if you start as an intern, the composer won't say to you, here's an action scene, can you write this bit for me?
True.
It really doesn't work like that. If you're an intern, you are not doing that for quite a while.
But it could get to eventually, which is one of my best times, I think, at the studio, but also worst, is that we've got a meeting at 2 p.m. and I wonder if we could flesh this out. Translation, we need a major, big orchestral thing. Could just put it together and maybe we can listen to it.
Yeah, that would happen at 10 a.m. that morning for 2 o'clock.
Or at 2 o'clock meeting.
Yeah.
Most likely it will not get played then.
Yes, that's the other thing. So there might be 6 other things, and this may come in and I might not play it, I might play it, I don't know. One of the things I do for meetings is have sacrificial pieces to either just sort of to make it look like like I've been busy. or actually just to check where filmmakers don't want to go sometimes. You know, it's just kind of like, well, just in case I'm going to play you this thing. I don't think it works, but tell me in case there's anything interesting about it that you find. You know, so sometimes do that.
The other thing we always laugh about is that I think but a major portion of what I do is to prove what not to do in films.
This is true, yeah. And sometimes that's the process. Is like I'll sketch a very quick idea out, and then rather than spending like 3 days, 2-3 days orchestrating it, Batu will do it, and then I can watch it. I can go, no, this is the wrong thing, you know, which is a terrible thing to do to him, but.
No, at first it was weird, but then I realised, well, you have to sometimes hear it to understand that it wasn't, or it was never going to work.
Yeah, and sometimes it works other places. You know, it might not be right in this place, but the idea was kind of something that was interesting to me, and so having it fleshed out and having it orchestrated so I can hear it properly, you know, and not doing it myself. It's a very important thing to know is that I do a lot of my own writing. You know, obviously it's a big question in Hollywood. Batu does a lot of writing as well. But sometimes if you've put a lot of time and energy into something and the director doesn't like it, it's very hard to give it up. It's very hard to say, no, okay, just throw it away, it's fine. An ego like that is almost not going to... If you have an ego that's good enough to let up something you've put so much energy into, it's also not the ego that will drive you through this business. So it's very good sometimes to have things that you don't have quite so much attachment to. You know, there are pieces that, you know, every note, every little bit of everything is there because I've put my heart into it, and sometimes I have trouble letting those go. Or sometimes I don't let them go, and they're probably not the best thing for the film, but fuck it, I'm going to keep it in. So.
I think on one video that I managed to find, talking about your technique, you talked a little bit about that, about the fact that sometimes being attached to ideas that you personally as a composer are really invested in is not necessarily the best choice for the film. And that getting feedback from directors can often, once you get over that kind of egoistic attachment to wanting it there, usually end up being a good thing. Do you still believe that?
Yeah, well, you're torn. I am torn. I'm two things. I'm allegedly a composer, so I'm trying to write music that says things, hopefully to people. But I'm making a living by writing music for film, so I'm then I'm trying to write the right music for the story. So my job is sort of twofold, which is I'm trying to write music that has an integrity in its own, and then I'm also trying to write music that works for film. And those two things definitely aren't necessarily going parallel all the time. They intertwine sometimes, and they're great when they work together, and it's difficult when it doesn't. And so yeah, I try to be kind of a filmmaker. As I get older and wiser, I'm trying more to be a filmmaker. Like, what is this story? What's good for the audience? What will make the audience enjoy this the most? And then try and write that. Of course, sometimes it can't, but you know, sometimes I think, you know, I can write something that does what the film needs and that I think is good musically, and that can be okay for films. Sometimes it depends if they will survive my ego.
So there was just a lovely exchange between you two, talking about the process of producing works, sometimes under duress and under extreme time pressure. My question would be, who is more of a realist in the process? Is it the composer, or is it the assistant?
That's an interesting one. Yeah, I mean, I think there's things about having done it so many times that makes you a realist way beyond anybody that hasn't. So you kind of just have an instinct that I guess this is number 66 or something, you know, it's like I guess this is going to happen and that will probably happen, you know, or there's a chance this will happen. So you kind of rely on that a little bit, but it can be dangerous because I think Batu is much more of a kind of he has more reminders set up on his phone than actually Apple ever imagined was possible.
This is true. Yeah.
In a minute, a reminder will go off as well, and he will just tick it off, and he'll tell me whatever it is, so I know that somebody around me actually knows we have to get something done by a certain time, and that it's incredibly useful. And Batu's not long really for this world in the sense that he's doing his own films, and I can't really ask him to do that very long. So that doesn't mean I've got a job available, by the way. I've got lots of people. So that's always a question of these things: is how do you become my assistant? And the answer is, I have no idea. It just happens, and it's not easy. And there's always a line of people already in place. So
I have no idea how that happens either, actually.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting, particularly for young composers that would love to have the opportunity to work side by side with established professionals. I know from my experience that used to be the traditional way in, and in fact that was probably how you started with Hans, correct?
yes, in a way. I also started before Hans. I studied with Patrick Doyle.
Right.
Well, I had another composer called Tim Suster. I would help people. I was simultaneously writing music for advertising and just learning it. And then Hans came along, needed help as well on one particular project. And then so you realise, and that it's incredibly useful. I wish I could say that you don't need to do that. I mean, in a way you don't. I mean, I still believe now that my advice to younger composers is that yes, there is a way that way, but there's so many people want to do it now, and it's so. I mean, I was so lucky. I was in a company in London of advertising music people, and I was the only one out of 15 who had lots and lots of equipment. I was the only one that was obsessed with electronic gear, and that's why I got to meet Hans and work with Hans, and then so I was lucky. And even at that time, there were very few people who were sort of following, who liked Hans's path. Everybody else was kind of more paper and doing it differently. And so for me, it was just the right time, the right person, the right everything. Nowadays, it's very different. So many people want to do it that it's just like a scrum of everyone trying to get in the door, which is why I say you should become an artist first. And that's where interesting film music is now coming from. It's rarely coming, with the exception of Batu, it's really coming from assistants, I think. It's coming from people who are completely outside of that and have become really interesting musical artists themselves. And then their music is found by interesting directors and put against picture. Obviously the trick is to both do that simultaneously to becoming a good storyteller. So, if you learn how to tell stories, you learn how cinema works, how directors are thinking, you then are always going to be ready for those first meetings. If you're just still, I'm touring and I'm doing this, then it's going to be hard for you to get in. But take more of an approach of being an artist, and you will make more unique music, and that more unique music will be found. I guarantee it. Of course, I can't guarantee it, but
It's very refreshing to hear the idea that being an assistant or working under established composers can be a kind of nursery for new sounds, new styles. It's very encouraging, but of course they need access to those assistantships. I'm just thinking about all of the young composers, particularly here and in industries where they have less access to established composers.
Yeah, you do, but you have much more access to the equipment that we have.
Right.
So it's, you guys haven't got anything, aren't missing anything that I haven't got. I mean, I've got a bigger this and a bigger that, but most of it is exactly the same libraries, the same sounds, everything. So you all should be making as interesting music as you can, because you can.
Well, I was mentioning the the Five Cat Studios, and we had this little discussion earlier about the studio equipment, and again, the salivating over the incredible list of equipment that you've got in your studios. Batu, do you know, are there any stories about particular pieces of equipment in that studio that you would like to share with us, perhaps? Because every piece of equipment probably has a story.
I think John's a better person to answer this. All I can say is everything's pretty old, and sometimes they don't get used. But recently, the most fun story we had, which isn't the answer to your question, but nevertheless, we've gotten rid of several handfuls of computers so that we can get new ones, and we've destroyed all of them, so that was fun. But yeah, you John, answer that.
Yeah, that was done while I wasn't there, because I'm too cheap and I would have been like, no, you can't. But apparently it's the only way of making sure that
You know, computers from 2006 sort of be relevant to our day.
that's still an incredible piece of technology compared with what I started. I mean, one of the advantages of Five Cat Studios is that it's a home studio. So, like I was going to say, on the film that comes out in September, Don't Worry Darling, I kind of took advantage of something else I had at home, which was her. Because I know the director wanted to sort of, it's a very interesting story. It's a very interesting story, and it's about women and men. So I'm not going to say too much. And so I wanted to play around with women's voices, and so so Holly would get calls from me. I work very early, like I get up at 5 and start and things. So she would get a call from me at 9 o'clock in the morning, to come down and do a session, which is about 3 hours before any soprano should ever get out of bed. And then there was one morning when we had a meeting at 9 o'clock, and so I actually woke her up at 6:30 in the morning, and she came down.
No, we started at 6 a.m.
So she remembers exactly. That tells me exactly what kind of important sort of decision it was for me to actually call and get her to come down. But it was one of those things where I could get to play with an instrument who was sort of there, and it's one of the things that made the score the way it is, very much the way it is.
Well, one of the interesting things that Holly and I talked about very briefly before this interview was talking a little bit about your instrument in particular, having the ability to have many different styles and to apply them in many different ways. How crucial is that for a singer, or practically any instrumentalist, but especially a singer, when you're making film music?
You never know what a film composer will want from you. He can have very classical, in choral setting, very classical choir, also be singing gospel in the same film. For me, I mean, just to have a career, it's very important to be able to sing whatever style is asked of me. A lot of composers know me as a specific thing. One knows me as a very breathy pop singer, one knows me as a jazz singer, one knows me as a high, boy soprano type of coloratura. And so, some people think they can only have an opera career, but that is very limiting. And in Los Angeles, it's great that we can be respected for this ability to show up and sing in whatever style is asked for us. For him, I've sung everything from opera to this "Don't Worry, Darling" thing, which was just a lot of breathing and weird sounds. So,
do you think that this is going back a little bit to your early electronic music studio days? I mean, working with a voice and manipulating sounds to find something new.
Oh yeah.
I was just going to say you sampled me.
Well, yes. Being able to sample is much easier than trying to sort of put it on a 4-track tape and scrub the tape in the right time onto another 2-track tape, or whatever it was I was doing in 1982. But everything is possible now, technologically. So then it really just does come down to sort of source material. And so having somebody like Ollie sort of provide this source material, these sounds, was just, that was in all sorts of different ways, and it was fascinating because it's about voices being shut down.
Yeah.
It's about taking away voices. So a lot of things we were doing were actually seemed quite sort of misogynistic from my point of view, because I was getting her to sort of like sing and close and things and do really strange things with the voice to try and have a set of sounds available that told musically this story of being shut down all the time. I think, I don't know, when you see the film, you'll see if it worked or not.
Just sort of continuing with that too, that search for sound. Obviously, you can tell that's my theme here. The search for sound, the search for sound in your music and through different styles, through equipment, and now through instruments as well. There's some trend in film music to move from notes to creating sounds from the orchestra. I know we've done a lot of sessions using these techniques called sound painting, which is basically aftertakes of recording sessions, where you can tell the orchestra to just make a little raspy sound or a little bit of batuto or something like that and record that, or even using human voices to create that. Is that something that you're interested in as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting thing now. And in Don't Worry Darling, I had an orchestra record in New York, but I also had done some previous samples in London, where I had a small ensemble and we tried things. That was slightly different in the sense that there are all these aleatoric techniques that people have been developing for years. I mean, there's nothing new about that. It's perhaps newer to be manipulated in certain ways, but even then not so much. Stockhausen has been doing that since the 50s. The question for me was, I wanted to use those techniques, but with a very, very romantic language.
Right.
So I took a lot of, I did what I called the 25 most romantic chords in the world, and I voiced them out, we wrote them out, and then I would get the orchestra to do various things with them, going from one to another, from just sort of, like changing them into something very different, or, taking them and sort of diffusing them, all sorts of things. I mean, actually, as a technique, so I try and apply the same kind of things you were talking about, but with these very romantic chords, as if it would be something that it's like if Mahler was doing a kind of a sort of if Mahler and Penderecki had been hanging out a lot and been giving each other ideas, that kind of thing, and that is great fun to do. You have to be lucky enough to be able to have an orchestra there.
Indeed. So speaking of orchestra, obviously you're working very strongly in both realms. There's a lot of techniques, there's a lot of studio techniques, there's a lot of electronic sounds that are being created, and then there's the orchestra, and there's the palette of sounds that you can create in the orchestra. Do you have a distinctly different relationship between the two, or do you think that they're really somehow the same?
For me, they're the same. The only difference is that you can push samples around and do things with samples, and you don't have to be polite about it. Whereas musicians, you have to be more careful with. You can't ask them to do difficult, terrible things to themselves over and over again for hours.
Yeah.
You have to be more careful. And the question is that orchestrally, everything has been done. So let's assume that all music has been written, all orchestration techniques have been developed. There's nothing new. So then the question is, what do you use, and how does it work well? Is it good for the film? And is it an interesting sound? I mean, my famous one is, from listening to Ravel and Rimsky-Korsakov, I truly view that the trumpet is a percussion instrument. And so the trumpets tonight are fantastic at that. There's some stuff in Pan. There's some double tonguing and triple tonguing in Pan, which is just incredibly hard, and they're doing it brilliantly, I must say. So
we had the privilege to listen to one of your works 2 nights ago, which was a fragment of the Requiem, correct?
yes.
I'm curious a little bit about the other interest, obviously, is concert works. Works that are outside of the media music realm, outside of the films that you're making. How valuable are those to you as a composer to continue to do?
They proved to be very valuable, I think, in the sense that it kind of made me realise. There was a point a while ago where I got very kind of sad about the idea that I was sort of retiring, you know. And I realised I'm not retiring, I'm going to get better. I'm going to see if I can get better at this. And so I just took steps, I thought, to try and improve my writing. And one of them was, don't write a film for a while. So it's the oratorio and other pieces. And then Gavin Greenaway and Michael Petrie and I, in 1994, wrote an opera, a chamber opera, a small one, and we've remade it. We've reorchestrated it, it's for bigger forces, and it's little changed and things. And Holly is one of the main characters. She was two of the main characters, but then...
They were married.
Yeah. Well, no, yeah, they were. It's difficult to describe. But there was a voice soprano and a woman soprano, and she did both of them to begin with while we were doing the demos. But we eventually got a real boy, as they say. That was some conversations. It's like, get me a real boy.
We're not going there right now.
No, but it's very important because it allows you to ask the question is why, and that's a phenomenally devastating question to ask a composer. And it comes down back to binary. It's like why? Why are you doing that? Why that chord? Why that tempo? Why that key? Why that sound? If you start asking that, you'll stop dead. And it's good for you. It is good for me because after I've done so much stuff, all of these films, I had to do that. I had to stop and sort of say, what is it you actually enjoy about music again? There was a couple of years where I went without hearing anything, playing anything, doing anything, other than various saws in the wood shop. That's all. And when I got back into music, I remember one particular thing. It was a very, very modern pop thing. And it was a remix of that, a very specific remix of that. And I remember listening to it, and it just, my head exploded again. And I thought, oh yeah, I remember, this is why I like music. Because every now and again, you hear something that just, you cannot begin to say. And that's the value of composing.
So curiosity, you're still curious, you still enjoy something new, and you're still looking for something new.
Yes, when things work for me, they still just like knock me over. I was at Coachella a while ago, which I never thought I would go to, but I went because Danny Elfman was playing and Holly was singing in that, so I went. The idea of getting me near a crowd of people is bad, if they're even calm, quiet and normal. But if there are 250,000 people who are on drugs and really with the sound of EDM going in the background, like artillery, it's just my idea of nightmare. So I went, and Danny comes on stage, and there's incredible screens and a huge sound system, and he just started, and it made me realise the value of that experience. I would never have gone there had I'd been dragged along, and boy, it was important because I did see what people get, and Danny's set was just incredible. It was mad, absolutely mad. He was doing the darkest stuff, and then to go straight to the Simpsons, and then deep down into the depths. It was just such sort of. It was an amazing view of kind of what you can do in music. He's very, very. And then that same weekend, I went to him doing the percussion concerto, and then we recently heard a cello concerto, which is incredible. Both incredible pieces, and then the violin concerto. So this is like it's encouraged me. It's like fuck, it's like you can really do lots of different things. He's not afraid of anything, and he does it with absolutely everything he's got, and so I'm very admiring of that. I think it's well worth sort of me trying to remember that it's possible.
it's exciting to be pushed by these experiences by your colleagues with new styles, new ideas, new ways of making music that also bring something to you. Who else are you watching out for at the moment?
It's difficult to say. I mean, I've had a few extremely important experiences in the last couple of years. One of which was, again, Holly was singing in it. It is the thing. That's the thing is your personal relationships bring you into different worlds, and you find things because somebody you're with is like saying, "No, I'm doing this, and I'm going there," and you think, "I can't be bothered," and then you are bothered because you're in a relationship, and you suddenly discover that there's something terribly important there. And so I think the first one was Lagrime, which is what's the name of the Lassus, yes. So it's 15th century, I think. 15th century composer. He'd written these pieces about the last words of Christ on the cross, and I probably heard it performed in my younger life in churches and things, but they staged it. The master chorale staged it. They had movement, and they did it by memory, the whole thing by memory. 22 of them. 21. And it was just the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I mean, I was overwhelmed with how much beauty could be brought into the world by, one person 7 centuries ago, and then another group of people, sort of reinterpreting it and finding something in it that was universal. Because it's a lot of sort of church music can be very, very kind of monotheistic, shall we say. That's written for a function. It's a bit like film music. It's written for a function, and then for somebody, a group of people to take it, interpret, and make something that did all the things that music has always done for me. Every time that happens, my head explodes. I love those experiences.
I don't think that was actually written for a church. I think that was his personal project as he was dying. Yeah,
Oh, really?
It was about his grief and his relationship with the church.
Oh yeah, right. No, that was the thing about it, is I was able to sort of read into it whatever I wanted, which means it's great music. You don't want to know what music really is. You don't want a composer to really tell you what the music is. Having said that, this evening I'll be telling you exactly what everything is.
It's exciting to, within 5 minutes, go from Danny Elfman to a 15th century church composer and see what type of things inspire you. When you were talking just a bit earlier about feeling like you're retiring or the creativity is needing a little bit of a break, I just want to say you don't have to worry, because composers don't actually ever die. They just decompose.
I couldn't believe you were actually going to go to that, Joe. Congratulations on your boldness.
So we have about 15 minutes more, and there are so many excited faces here. Can we take some questions?
Of course, yeah.
Do we have a microphone for questions?
You don't really need mine.
Yeah, it's just more of just chat, well, yeah. But I mean, the thing is, if it needs to be translated.
Frederick, could you come over here? You'll be the microphone carrier. There we go. So who would like to ask the first question?
Will it be in English or Polish?
In English, please.
Well, it can be in Polish because I have
Well, I
the
know
UN.
Polish, so that would be
Oh, but I'd still like you to do it in Polish.
So, a lot of the things that excite me and my friends in music are things that are sort of unexpected, that take you to places that you wouldn't think music could go. I wonder if you find yourself, if there's a process that you have found that helps you go to those places that you wouldn't, automatically go to, that helps you surprise yourself when you're at.
It's hard. There's a couple of things that I've found which they sound kind of shit when I say them. That idea of actors being, what do they call it, when you live the character. what I mean by that is, no matter how terrible the film is, I believe it. And that is surprising at how much emotion you can get out of yourself when you trick yourself into thinking this is a good film. Well, it's not. You're not thinking it's a good film when it's not a good film, but you're empathising, overly empathising perhaps, with the characters, in a way that the audience will never ever get because the film doesn't work. You know, that's part of the business. Is that everyone's trying to make a good film, but not everybody to run their hands. So you're on a film. You can either go, oh, this is terrible. I'm just going to do what I can, or you become involved, and it's useful, I think, for the music you create. But obviously, at the end of it, when the film comes out and there's reviews, you have to sort of like question your sanity, because it's why did I get so emotionally involved in these characters? Because nobody else in the world did. But I think it is your job to do that. So that would be a place that will surprise you if you really sort of avoid the obvious, and see if you can find a way into the story on a deeper level, even if it's not going to work. If it is going to work, great, you can do it. The ones that work, the films that just work, you don't kind of have to do, like United 93, I could hardly watch that. I watched it once with sound and then never again with sound. While I was working on it, it's just what it is, and it all works, and it had everything there. The hardest thing was writing music, because the danger was you were just, doing something that was unnecessary. So I didn't even get involved in that because it was just so obvious, it was so in your face. I had to actually cool myself. I had to calm myself. I had to become very hard and just pretend it wasn't happening. That was the one gig where it was like, this is just a gig. I'm not gonna involve myself in this story at all, because it was too devastating. But things like Julie, you have to go deep.
Could we have another question? Over here, Friedrich?
You worked with lots of composers, and with who you think your work was the best?
The composers I've worked with the best? I mean, there's different people you get to sort of meet, and you see them at their highs, and you get to see them at their lows as well. I didn't get to see John Williams at his low, because he doesn't have a low.
But you worked with Hans Zimmer or Harry Gregson Williams?
Yes, I've seen the highs and lows of both of them. Hans has some incredible highs, and sitting there, I've sat there and watched him compose, and the first 10 minutes were like, this is endless, is this ever going to happen? Is it ever going to happen? As he very carefully arranged, played one chord, and then would think, and then try other things. It would very slowly, and then the programming, and then all the writing the levels, writing all the controllers, and the detail and lengths of notes and things. And this is early on, and I'm watching it, and I'm going, is this ever going to happen? Is this ever going to happen? And I sat there for 2 hours, and at the end of 2 hours, there was not a greater piece of 16 measures of music that I'd ever seen. It just happened right there in front of me, but very slowly and very methodically. So, yes, everybody has highs. Harry and I were pitted against each other in a way. That's on ants. We didn't know each other, but Jeffrey Katzenberg was like Hunger Games. We'll throw them in together, see who can think. And so Harry and I would, and the Hans would take us, and he'd come into my room and he'd go, you need to come and see what. He'd listen to something I was doing, and he'd say, you need to come and listen to what Harry's doing. We were on different scenes in the movie, but we would go, and I would walk into Harry's room, and he'd play it, and I'd think, holy shit, this is really good. Really good. So I'd then go away and start work. And then 3 nights later, the door would open, Hans would come in with Harry, and Harry would go, Hans says you've got something good, let's have a listen. And so I play something, and you know, if Hans had got it right, it was something that he knew that would really, really piss off Harry. Because it was working, it was good. And then Harry would be like, and walk out. And then he'd spend the whole night doing something that was brilliant again. So, you know, that kind of world was very good for us. At that point in our careers, it was fabulous for us. You know, you know, we're very good friends. I love Harry very much, and he's a brilliant composer. So it was great to sort of be pitted literally against a sort of contemporary and a competitor right there. But we were actually working for the same film, so it was a great thing to do that. I mean, Pat Doyle, I remember working with Pat Doyle where I really wasn't doing much, but I was just sort of helping him with things and, you know, and watching him do, he did the opening of one of the Shakespeare ones he did with Kenneth Branagh, and I remember with the orchestra, it was just so joyful. I remember thinking, what a marvellous sort of orchestral, you know, colour for how to do this kind of joyful opening. You know, and I think Pat's always been amazing at that as well. You know, there's been lots of people I've worked with. There's lots of people I'd love to work with, but you know, composers tend not to work together. Gavin and I started working together when we were at college. So I actually didn't have I thought that was completely normal, really. I didn't realise that composers were as solitary as really I discovered we have to be.
We have time for one more brief question. Over here.
So I just wanted to ask, what was the project which you had the most artistic freedom to explore your music and that you were proud of, and how was working like that? How was it?
Well, the most artistic freedom I had was on the oratorio because it wasn't for a director. What of a film? I mean, there were some. The Bourne Supremacy, which was the second Bourne film, I had a lot of freedom because Paul Greengrass, who is a brilliant director, had never done anything quite that big. He'd never worked in Hollywood. They told me he'd been hired, and they sent me his film called Bloody Sunday. And Bloody Sunday is the most amazing film, and it's got like one bass note in it for a cue. That's about it. But it didn't need it. It just didn't need it. That's the thing about Paul. So I was very nervous when Paul arrived in Los Angeles, and we were getting ready to start writing the score. And he just said to me, "Look, I like what you did on the first movie. I've hired everybody from the first movie, same editors. Everybody was basically the same. The film was different. It was very different from the first one. But what he basically said was, just, you know what you're doing. Just do it. You know." And so that one, I remember having a lot of kind of feeling that I could really take what I'd done on the first film and see if I could develop it. That was fun. Happy Feet was 3.5 years of sort of music, all sorts of music, lots and lots of different types of music. And so that was great fun because I was responsible for everything. It wasn't all composed, but a lot of the stuff I was doing, you know, was just sort of heaven to get to do. I had recorded 600-piece choirs, and, you know, boys' choirs singing, you know, Beach Boys songs, and there was all sorts of stuff, you know, lots of different sort of solo voices. Robin Williams, just recording it and things. So things like that are great fun. Yeah, I'd say, and you know, Don't Worry Darling was really interesting. She's a brilliant filmmaker. So watch that space, I tell you. And so it was very interesting because that was a question of what I now ask myself is, can I be useful for a film? Because there's lots of people who can do it. The question is, can I be more useful than somebody else? It's not about being better anymore. It's just like, can I bring something to this that other people want? So, and that's how I kind of approached that one. I mean, it gave me a feeling of sort of both freedom, but also the right responsibility for it. And I think we hopefully got something that she felt was, you know, she would
speaking of freedom and useful, I think I can speak on behalf of everyone here. It's been extremely useful to have all three of you here today. We want to thank you and give you your freedom to go.